The sun, crimson and weary, dipped towards the horizon, casting long, ghostly shadows across the sun-baked streets of Willow Creek, Texas. Sheriff Evelyn Sterling's patrol car idled outside her modest home. Evelyn, 38, with dark brown eyes that reflected weariness, exhaled with relief. Being the sheriff in Willow Creek meant being judge, jury, and mother to this God-forsaken corner of the world. 3 years ago, at 35, she became the youngest sheriff in the town's history and the first woman to wear the star. Shock and skepticism hung in the air, but Evelyn, day after day, proved her worth. Stepping out of the car, she felt the warm, enveloping evening air brush her face. The scent of blooming jasmine from Mrs. Henderson's garden, a gentle reminder of a peaceful life, filled her senses. A faint smile touched her lips. Home, she thought. This week had been hellish. 2 double shifts in a row, without a break. Only the thought of a quiet evening with Cody, her husband, kept her going. Cody, her rock, her steadfast anchor in the tumultuous sea of law enforcement. He was 40 and a respected history teacher at the local high school. His students adored him, and his colleagues admired him. Their love story was a local legend, a principled cop and a passionate educator, seemingly incompatible, but made for each other. Evelyn pictured his smile, his warm embrace, and the fatigue receded into the background. She quickened her pace toward the house, where peace and love awaited her. Evelyn walked along the gravel path to her house when she noticed Mrs. Henderson bent over her prized roses. The old woman looked up, and their eyes met, but only for a moment. In that fleeting glance, Evelyn caught something strange, a mixture of pity and awkwardness, which instantly triggered her police instincts. Nonsense, she thought, dismissing the feeling. Mrs. Henderson had always been eccentric. "Good evening, Mrs. Henderson," Evelyn called out, trying to keep her voice warm despite the accumulated fatigue. The elderly woman flinched, as if from a sudden gunshot, and nearly dropped her watering can. "Oh, good evening, Sheriff. I didn't see you there." Evelyn's eyebrow raised slightly, noticing her neighbor's nervous reaction, but she attributed it to her imposing presence. It wasn't the first time people had become uneasy in her presence at the sight of her badge. "Lovely evening, isn't it?" Evelyn tried again, hoping to ease the tension. Mrs. Henderson nodded sharply, her gaze darting anxiously between Evelyn and the door to her house. Yes, lovely. I hope you have a pleasant evening, Sheriff." With those words, as if fleeing, the elderly woman disappeared into the house, leaving Evelyn standing on the lawn in complete bewilderment. What was that about? Something subtle had changed in the atmosphere, but Evelyn couldn't quite grasp what it was. With a frustrated shake of her head, she turned to face the house. Whatever it was, she'd figure it out later. Right now, she desperately wanted a hot shower, a plate of something comforting, and solace in Cody's arms. Barely touching her keys, she felt an icy shiver run down her spine. A faint, almost inaudible sound, but unmistakable to her trained ear. The sound was coming from inside the house, from upstairs. Evelyn froze, her hand hovering over the doorknob, as if frozen in place. In her head, like a persistent fly, a distant memory surfaced, a snippet of overheard conversation in the local diner. Muffled voices, full of indignation, whispering about Cody. Back then, she dismissed it, chalking it up to small-town gossip, to the dirty rumors that spread like wildfire where there was little else to do for entertainment. But now, standing on the threshold of her own home and hearing these muffled sounds, doubt, like poisonous ivy, began to entwine her heart. Evelyn took a deep breath, gathering her strength. Whatever awaited her behind that door, she would face it head-on. She was Sheriff Evelyn Sterling, and fear was unknown to her. With firm determination reflected in every line of her face, she turned the knob and stepped inside. The house was eerily silent, broken only by the mournful creak of the floorboards beneath Evelyn's feet and the muffled sounds coming from upstairs. Her police instincts sharpened instantly. Her eyes scanned the space greedily, searching for the slightest deviations, her ears catching every rustle, and her body tensed, ready for immediate reaction. In the living room, everything seemed to be in order. On the coffee table, next to a well-worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, rested Cody's reading glasses. Beside them, a half-empty cup of cold coffee, an idyll of domestic comfort that clashed with the growing anxiety, the icy knot clenching Evelyn's stomach. Approaching the stairs, she could hear the sounds from above more clearly, the rhythmic creaking of a bed, punctuated by soft sighs and moans. They were coming from the master bedroom, her and Cody's bedroom. Drawing a breath, Evelyn resolutely turned the knob and pushed the door open. What unfolded before her eyes exceeded her darkest premonitions. There, on their marital bed, was Cody. And just like that, Evelyn's world crumbled in an instant. Locked in a tight embrace, intertwined as one, were Cody and a woman whose face she knew intimately, down to the smallest mole. A woman with skin the color of dark chocolate and sculpted cheekbones, as if carved by a sculptor's hand. The woman who had given her life poured her soul into her and taught her to distinguish light from darkness. Her mother, Beatrice. Time stood still, turning into a viscous molasses. Evelyn, as if rooted to the spot, stood in the doorway, unable to believe her eyes. Cody and Beatrice, lost in the depths of betrayal, hadn't noticed her arrival. Beatrice was the first to catch her gaze. In eyes that mirrored Evelyn's own, horror flared. "Evelyn," she whispered, frantically trying to cover herself, as if that could conceal the full depravity of what was happening. The sound of his wife's name seemed to jolt Cody out of his stupor. He snapped his head up, and his face, which a moment ago had been flushed with passion, instantly paled. "Oh, God," he muttered like a prayer. "Evelyn, I can explain everything." But Evelyn no longer heard his words. A roar, fierce and deafening, filled her ears, drowning out all other sounds. She felt like an outside observer, distantly watching the hurricane raging within her soul. And then, as if a dam had burst, all the pain, all the despair, all the rage crashed down upon her, threatening to wash her off the face of the earth. With a sudden surge of emotion, Evelyn lunged toward the bed. She began striking out with her hands, not fully aware of what she was aiming at. She vaguely felt attempts to stop her, but she resisted with unexpected force. In the commotion, she found herself next to her mother. Beatrice's face, so familiar and yet so distant, was filled with fear. Slightly out of control, Evelyn involuntarily moved closer, and her teeth grazed her mother's lip. Beatrice's exclamation drew attention, reflecting the discomfort she was experiencing. The unpleasant sensation in her mouth caused Evelyn to pull away, feeling mixed emotions about what had happened. However, her intense emotional state persisted. Noticing Cody trying to leave, his body pale and trembling, Evelyn reacted quickly. Her hand swiftly and decisively grabbed him, causing Cody to react sharply. Evelyn continued to hold him, expressing a mixture of hurt and revulsion in her gaze. "How could you?" she managed to say. "How could you?" The tension was palpable. Cody's face was etched with intense suffering. He lost his balance and fell to the floor. Evelyn stood over him, trying to catch her breath, with a minor injury on her face. The room was in disarray. Crumpled sheets, overturned furniture, and a foul odor hung in the air. From a distance, the sounds of approaching vehicles could be heard. The neighbors had likely noticed the commotion. Days later, she looked at her hands, stained with various substances. What had she done? The sounds of the vehicles grew louder, and Evelyn sank to her knees. The tension gave way to exhaustion and pain, so intense that it was difficult to breathe. Tears streamed down her cheeks. In the distance, doors slammed shut, and footsteps echoed on the stairs. Evelyn didn't move. There was nowhere to run. nowhere to hide. The realization of what had happened, which she had been putting off for so long, finally hit her. And now she would have to answer for her actions. The door to the room burst open, and Evelyn saw several objects resembling weapons pointed at her by people she worked with. Their faces were a mixture of surprise, revulsion, and pity. "Sheriff Sterling," one of them said, his voice slightly uncertain. "You're under arrest." As the metal restraints clicked onto her wrists, Evelyn closed her eyes. In a short space of time she had faced significant losses. A loved one, a relative, her job, her independence. All that remained was the bitter taste of betrayal and the understanding that everything had changed. The holding cell at the Willow Creek precinct was a place Evelyn Sterling was familiar with. She had overseen its improvement, striving for better lighting and more comfortable conditions for those who temporarily found themselves there. Now, sitting on the hard surface, leaning against the cool wall, she recognized the irony of the situation. The events of the last few hours replayed in her mind, like a disturbing film she couldn't stop. Evelyn felt a wave of nausea as she recalled what she had seen and experienced. She tried to focus on something else. Beyond her cell, she could hear the muffled voices of her former colleagues. Their words were indistinct, but from their tone she sensed a mixture of surprise, concern, and intense scrutiny of the situation. Evelyn had always tried to maintain a low profile and avoid the conflicts that often arose in small police departments. Now, she was the center of attention. A shadow fell across the floor of the cell, and Evelyn saw Deputy Chief Vincent Lancaster standing there. His face, usually affable, was grave. "Evelyn," he said quietly. "What happened?" She gave a bitter laugh, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "What happened, Vincent? I'll tell you what happened. I came home to find an unpleasant situation. That's what happened." Vincent was clearly taken aback by her words. "Oh," he said. Then, composing himself, he continued. "Look, Evelyn, I've known you for years. You're not prone to aggression. This isn't like you." "Isn't it?" Evelyn replied, her voice flat. "Maybe you never really knew me, Vincent. Maybe I never knew myself." Vincent sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Your mother and Cody. They're both at the medical facility. Your mother has been treated, and Cody, he's still under observation. Specialists are running tests, but they say there could be lasting effects." Evelyn felt a fleeting sense of relief at the news, immediately followed by a feeling of unease. What was happening to her, that she could feel something like that, even towards those who had wronged her? "What happens now?" she asked, though she had a rough idea of the answer. "Now," Vincent replied, "now we wait for the authorities to review the situation. But Evelyn, it looks pretty serious. Assault causing bodily harm, possibly with lasting consequences. If it goes badly, you could be facing a significant case." "I want legal representation," she said finally, her voice barely audible. Vincent nodded. "Of course, I'll arrange that right away." He hesitated, then added, "As for me, Evelyn, I'm very sorry about the situation. No one should have to face something like this." As he turned to leave, Evelyn called out, "Vincent!" He stopped, looking back at her. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for your support." After Vincent left, Evelyn lay down on the narrow cot, staring at the ceiling. The day's events replayed in her mind, stirring up a complex mix of emotions. She thought of Cody, a man she had cared for and trusted for so long. Had their connection been built on falsehoods? How long had this deception been going on? And her mother, Beatrice. She had always been a difficult person, prone to criticism. But this level of betrayal was beyond anything Evelyn could have imagined. The memory of her mother and Cody together sent a wave of nausea through her. As the night wore on, Evelyn's thoughts turned to the future. Her life, so carefully constructed through years of hard work and dedication, had been irrevocably altered in a short space of time. What would become of her property, her savings, the position she had worked so hard to achieve? And, more importantly, how would others react when the news got out? In a small community like Willow Creek, news traveled fast. It was likely that the unfortunate situation involving a law enforcement officer would soon become public knowledge, a topic of discussion not only in the local press, but also in larger publications. Evelyn imagined the potential headlines, the increased scrutiny from journalists eager to dissect every aspect of her life. And what about her colleagues, the residents of Willow Creek? Would they see her as a person facing difficult circumstances, or would they judge her guilty, unworthy of the position she held? As the first rays of light crept through the small window, Evelyn finally drifted into a restless sleep. She dreamt of disjointed images, faces of people she knew, a feeling of bitterness, the sound of a lock clicking shut. She was awakened by the sound of the door to her holding cell opening a few hours later. A young officer, Nicholson, she recalled, stood there, his face expressionless. "Miss Sterling," he said, the formal address striking Evelyn more than she expected. "Your counsel is here." Evelyn sat up, smoothing her disheveled hair. This is it, she realized, the beginning of her new reality. Whatever came next, arraignment, plea deal, alternative housing, nothing would ever be the same. As she rose to follow Nicholson out of the cell, Evelyn took a deep breath. She had faced challenges in her life and career, dealt with difficult people, and navigated complex situations. This, she told herself, was just another problem to solve. But deep down, in a part of herself she didn't always acknowledge, Evelyn knew the truth. This wasn't just another problem. This was a change to everything she knew, everything she was. And the path ahead was less clear, less certain than anything she had ever faced before. News of Sheriff Evelyn Sterling's temporary suspension spread quickly through Willow Creek. By midday of the following day, many residents of the small Texas town knew some version of what had transpired. As often happens, facts had mingled with conjecture, and the stories grew more sensational with each retelling. The Willow Creek diner was bustling during the lunch rush, as usual. Silverware clinked, patrons conversed across tables, their voices a low hum. "I heard she walked in on something unexpected and just lost it," said Mildred Jenkins, the local mail carrier, her eyes widening behind her glasses. Things got out of hand. Her companion, retired schoolteacher Bertha Wilson, shook her head sadly. "It's just so unfortunate." Evelyn always seemed so level-headed. Who would have thought she was capable of something like this? At a nearby table, Walter Thompson, the owner of the hardware store, grumbled. Level-headed? She probably had a hard time from the start. "I always thought putting a woman in as sheriff was asking for trouble." His wife, Doris Thompson, shot him a disapproving look. "Walter, please. Don't make it about gender. Anyone, man or woman, might snap if they found their partner in a compromising position with a close relative. It's a highly undesirable circumstance, to say the least." While the cafe buzzed with gossip, a sense of unease settled over Willow Creek High School, in another part of town. Cody Sterling was a well-respected teacher, admired by students and colleagues alike. Now, substitute teachers were filling in for his classes, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. In the teacher's lounge, the discussion was quieter, but no less intense. Beverly Kim, the biology teacher, stirred cream into her coffee, shaking her head. "I just can't believe it," she said softly. Cody always seemed so devoted to Evelyn. Harold Moore, the assistant principal, sighed. "It just goes to show you never know what's going on behind closed doors. It's a messy situation for Evelyn and Cody, to say the least. Rumor has it he may be facing a long recovery." The repercussions of the incident reached far beyond the borders of Willow Creek. In the neighboring city of Dallas, the press was actively investigating the story. Local news outlets dispatched reporters to Willow Creek, their satellite trucks becoming a common sight on the town's quiet streets. At the Dallas Chronicle, editor-in-chief Clarence Reed listened intently as his lead reporter, Isabel Diaz, spoke. "It's a real powder keg," Isabel said with enthusiasm. Small-town sheriff walks in on a compromising situation with people close to her, and it escalates into a major conflict with unpredictable consequences. You can't make this stuff up. Clarence nodded thoughtfully. It has the potential to capture the public's attention, that's for sure. Good, but we need to tread carefully, Isabel. This isn't just about the sensationalism of the story. There are real people involved, and their lives are affected. I want you to dig deeper, get the backstory, not just the juicy details. Back in Willow Creek, at the First Baptist Church, Pastor Silas Atkinson called an impromptu meeting. The pews were filled with concerned residents seeking solace in the wake of the unfolding events. "Let us bow our heads in prayer," Pastor Atkinson intoned, his calm voice resonating through the sanctuary. "For Sheriff Sterling, for her husband, Cody, and for Beatrice. Let us pray for healing, for understanding, and for forgiveness." The congregation bowed their heads, their faces a mixture of emotions. Some offered genuine sympathy, while others struggled to conceal their fascination with the scandal that had rocked their normally peaceful town. Meanwhile, at the Willow Creek Sheriff's Department, the atmosphere was tense. Deputies and administrative staff carried out their duties with forced precision, but Sheriff Sterling's absence was palpable. Her office stood empty, the blinds drawn, a stark reminder of how quickly things could change. Under Sheriff Vincent Lancaster sat at his desk, his phone ringing almost non-stop. Members of the press, concerned citizens, officials from other agencies, all clamoring for information, explanations, confirmations. "No comment at this time," Vincent repeated, probably for the 100th time that day, his voice weary. "There's an ongoing investigation. We'll release an official statement when we have more information." Hanging up the phone, Vincent glanced at the framed photograph on his desk. It was a picture of him and Evelyn at her swearing-in ceremony 3 years earlier. Evelyn's face radiated joy and confidence, her badge prominently displayed. Vincent felt a pang of unease. How could the situation have changed so drastically? In another part of town, in an ordinary house on Elm Street, Beatrice Sterling lay alone in her room, applying a cool compress to her face. The room was dimly lit, the windows shielded from the prying eyes of neighbors and journalists who had begun to appear nearby. Beatrice was experiencing a complex mix of emotions: embarrassment, anxiety, resentment, and a touch of bewilderment. For a long time she had felt on the periphery of her daughter's life, observing her achievements and recognition, which seemed unattainable for Beatrice herself. Her involvement with Cody had started as a way to assert her own significance, to prove that Beatrice was still capable of something. Now, sitting in the encroaching twilight, Beatrice wondered if her actions had been justified. She had complicated her relationship with her daughter, impacted Cody's life, and become the subject of town gossip. And for what? For fleeting moments of unusual experiences, the thrill of doing something outside the norm? As night fell on Willow Creek, a quiet stillness settled over the town. In their homes, residents gathered, discussing the day's events. Adults tried to explain what had happened to their children, often resorting to general phrases about the complexities of relationships. At the local motel, correspondents from various cities prepared stories that would soon appear in news publications. The story of Sheriff Evelyn Sterling and the challenges she faced was gaining widespread attention. In her room at the police station, Evelyn couldn't sleep, her mind racing with the events that had unfolded. The recent events replayed in her mind. Every time she tried to rest, she thought of Cody and Beatrice, their interactions, the bitter taste in her mouth, the feeling of constraints. She recalled them together, feeling a surge of outrage. Evelyn's thoughts turned to the future. What awaited her? Would she be deprived of her freedom? And if so, how would she cope in a place filled with people she had encountered in her professional life? But more than anything, how could she ever trust anyone again? The people she had cared about had turned out to be different than she thought. Her world had shifted, leaving her in a state of uncertainty and distress. With the first rays of sunlight filtering into her room, Evelyn made a decision. Whatever happened, she would try to handle it. She was still Evelyn Sterling, the woman who had worked her way up to sheriff. She had experience overcoming challenges, and she believed she could do it again. But despite this confidence, a quiet voice inside her asked questions. Was it possible to fully recover from this kind of ordeal, or would it change her life forever? Only the future would reveal the answer. For Evelyn Sterling, formerly holding a position in Willow Creek, Texas, now the most valuable resource became time.